Here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've talked a lot about the Steelers' needs, but is tight end just too good of a position in this NFL draft class to pass up? We'll talk about that and a lot more with Matt Williamson, NFL draft expert and Steelers expert himself, right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as your bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today we're joined by, I believe, the original host of Locked On Steelers, correct, Matt? Did you start this channel?
I did not. I started
Locked
On NFL. I was the very first host of any Locked On NFL, the whole world of NFL. But I actually recommended Adam Crawley back when for the original host of Locked On Steelers.
Oh, I know Adam hosted. I didn't know he was the first host. That's very cool.
Sure. That's a long time ago. I need a history lesson here.
It was a long time ago. Trust me, I go through my Apple reviews and see people giving Crowley takes. But glad to have you on the show as one of the Locked On OGs out here. And if y'all don't know Matt Williamson, he's on when he's Williamson of Peacock and Williamson, the Locked On show that we do. He's on the Locked On Dynasty for talking about fantasy football. You hear him all the time on Steel Nation Radio with the drive that he does with Dale Lally. He is an encyclopedia of football information, so we're happy to have him on the show. Matt, I want to talk to you about this tight end class because I've heard you talk about it with Dale. We've talked about it when we were both in Indy, but this seems like a special tight end class with the talent that could be lined up there. But we've been talking all this time about Steelers needing to address the offensive line, needing a young defensive lineman to come in and start carrying the flag for the next generation whenever Cam Hayward's done, a young cornerback, a linebacker, a lot of different positions. Tight end is the one some people will scratch their head about, but what makes this class so special and something that needs to be looked at?
Yeah, I've started to feel stronger and stronger about this. And the root of it is I think this is the best position group in the entire draft. So I really do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's loaded. Musgrave is my favorite, but there's what I really think are probably 5 guys in the top 50, whatever order you like. And when we look back at this class, I also think the depth is really going to be reflective down the line too, that there may be 8 or 9 starters in this class 2-3 years from now, which is rare. I mean, it's rare to see these guys get taken that high. So Kevin Colbert was really good at this. I'm very much a believer in this in the draft, is use free agency to give yourself at least a couple bites of the apples at the strongest positions. Is tight end the Steelers' biggest need? Of course not. I mean, they need linebackers. They need a corner. Right. They need offensive line. We know all those things. But they have a wealth of early picks, and they went to a lot of 12 personnel after trading Claypool, and Gentry ended up with the 11th most snaps of any offensive player. And of those 11 players, I thought he was the 11th best. I mean, Gentry's fine, but I think teams like to play against Gentry. So they got a lot better with more 12 and less 11 with 3 receivers. I think that if you can add one of these guys, and I'm not in the market at 17, but anywhere from 32 to the 4th round or so, I think you'll start to get bargains, because if I'm right that there's maybe 12 legit tight end prospects here, you're going to get a guy with an early 3rd round grade in the middle of the 4th round. I mean, how many teams are shopping for tight ends? So I think you really want to set yourself up to get one of them that's an upgrade, especially athletically, on Gentry.
I hear you on that. And it would be very interesting. Also, something that you and I was talking about at the combine, Friermuth's not a blocker yet, and maybe he never will be. He's very strictly a receiving tight end for the Steelers. And it kind of, helped when he ever flexed out to that position. But the Steelers could really use a traditional tight end who is a good receiver, but can block his butt off. Who do you feel are the better blocking tight ends, or are all of the top guys in that category?
They're not all in that category. Like Kincaid, to me, is much more of Evan Ingram move tight end. And I'm with you. Like, I look at it two ways. Like, Kelsey for the Chiefs is really a big slot receiver. And Claypool was really almost a small tight end. Like, so the Steelers could use a slot, but the addition of a tight end would make Friermuth your slot even more, like you said. So I would prefer, as you insinuated, a bigger inline guy that'll block or will develop as a blocker that brings more to the table for sure than Gentry as a receiver. So some names to look at are Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion. He's a Penn State transfer, played with Friermuth, actually, 6'7". He's, and he had the best combine in the history of the combine from the tight end position. I mean, what he did in Indy is bonkers. Musgrave is my favorite, but I think he's going to go a little too early. And he is more receiver than blocker, but I don't even care with him because I'm infatuated with him. Schoonmaker from Michigan is more of that fourth round type guy, and his game just translates really, really well to the league. The one that I keep coming back to, though, is Darnell Washington from Georgia.
He looks like a freak.
He's a freak. He was 264, but played at like 280. They have him blocking defensive ends in the SEC, and he bends at the waist a little more than you'd like, but he likes it. He's big and physical. He tested unbelievably well. Like at 32, I'm thinking about Darnell Washington, and I could probably give you 5 other names. I mean, the best blocking tight end that's an every down player is Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, and he loves it, and he's nasty as could be, and I'm sure this team would love him. He's just not quite as athletic as Washington or Musgrave or some of those. But, I mean, he's a very, very good player.
No, I feel you. I like a lot of these guys that I've watched. I haven't watched exclusive tape or extensive tape on the tight end class. I've been able to check out a few things here and there. I saw some of their drills when they were at the combine, and just there was a really funny clip of every tight end moving the sled in the drills, and then Washington just driving the sled. And it was just, my goodness. And then he was making crazy one-handed catches in the drills, and it's just those things flashed, and he tested well, and you see his size, you see how physical he was as a Georgia tight end against SEC defensive ends, and it's just like, man, pairing that with Pat Friermuth. And then also, again, you're looking at an offense that Steelers want to be a run-balanced offense that, they don't run the ball all the time, but make it easier so you're not always calling upon Kenny Pickett to save you, that you could be more dominant. And what would be a better way than to have 2 tight ends on the field, one actually being a very good blocker, not just a decent blocker, but a very good one, and that also is a receiving threat, and you have 2 receiving threats coming off the line. I think that could put them in a very good position and maybe give Matt Canada a little bit more balance to play with this upcoming year.
Absolutely. And to take it a little further, to really nerd out on you, because I just actually wrote an article about this, but I've been talking about this a lot lately, is there's a couple areas that the Steelers and Pickett in particular really struggled. Is, first of all, and this is kind of a Canada thing, they need to attack the middle of the field much more. And adding a tight end obviously correlates with that. They need to really up the play action usage. I also think having a good tight end helps a great deal with that. Play action, tight end gets, behind a linebacker, in front of the safety, middle of the field, easy completion, move the chains. But the biggest thing I'm going to nerd out on is, and this is going to sound like I'm being rough on Kenny. It's not at all a knock on him, because every early quarterbacks very, very, very much struggle in the red zone and between 10 and 20 yards downfield. And the reason is those are the hardest throws in the league. I mean, they're just condensed. There's a lot of great defensive players in there. When you get to the Burrow, Mahomes level, you start to dominate in those areas. Kenny's not there yet. Well, what do tight ends do well? They help in the red zone, and they help from 10 to 20 yards downfield. So I think this sets up really well to help your young quarterback without losing anything that you established in the run game, giving you more versatility, a cheap young option for the next 4 years or so. That's is also very talented. And it also, opens up Friermuth a little bit. Like, if Washington's out, or here we go. If Friermuth is your 7th best blocker on the field, you know what I mean? In the run game, 5 running backs, a Washington-like guy, and Friermuth. Well, that's not a liability. I mean, if he's your 5th or 6th best blocker, that's a problem. But if he's your 7th and Pickens is your 8th, you're going to move some bodies.
I hear you on that. And I think that's That's certainly part of the formula. I'd be intrigued to see how the Steelers work, especially with Najee Harris. I think getting better, Jalen Warren, them becoming a real 1-2 punch, and then like you said, that's where the play action can come in, because then as a defense, and heck, we've seen this with certain teams that have been able to pair really good athletic tight ends who could block and also catch. Is that it puts defenses on this balancing beam where do they have the personnel to attack these guys physically and win at the line of scrimmage to stop the run? And if they do, can those guys then be prepared to run with athletic tight ends down the middle part of the field? And especially in the red zone, where the Steelers finished 22nd best in the NFL this last year. And they definitely need to improve that if they want to, take steps forward and actually show growth as an offense. So I'm right with you, Matt. I want to continue this discussion and also address a caller's question here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll get into those in just a minute. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel. And of course, FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook app in America. And if you can download the FanDuel right now to bet on all the NBA games that are going on right now, and new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win, if you're a new customer at FanDuel's sportsbook. Now, when you're going to bet on NBA games, you don't just bet on the games themselves. You can bet on the money line. You can bet on point scores. You can bet on how many threes get drained. Then FanDuel lets you even make player prop bets and also lets you combine all your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlay. So don't miss out on the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Matt Williamson of the legendary Lords. He's on all the shows. If you're an NFL listener or you're a Steelers listener, you know Matt Williamson and his knowledge he brings to the game. Matt, finishing up the tight end point we were talking about, you said you wouldn't take one at 17. Where is the sweet spot? Is it at 32, like you were saying earlier, like a Darnell Washington at 32? Or can they even wait till like 80 in the third round if they wanted to and still get someone of really good value?
I think all the above. That's the beauty of it. I'm very open to the idea of trading down at 17. I think you're going to get a lot of offers at 32 because I'd like to gain some more picks in that fourth, fifth round where there's just a desert wasteland right now. And I also think day 2 is where you want to be picking in this draft pound for pound. But I think that's doubly true for tight ends because I rattled off, 8 or 9 names, and there was 4 or 5 I just skipped over that I think are going to go somewhere between, the top-notch guys I think are going to go between 20 and 55, where useful Steeler additions could go all the way into the 4th and 5th round to me. I just think you're going to get value. There's a lot of them.
I feel you on that. And I think that I've been talking a lot about the show, especially on day 2 value, day 3 value too. If they could finally get some picks in the 5th and 6th rounds, they have a pick in the 4th round at 120, and then their next pick is all the way in the 7th round. That's a long wait on day 3 between picks. So maybe they could pick up some then. And I've talked a lot about this show about trading back from 17, trading back from 32, and maybe being able to get a haul where you get an additional day 2 pick and maybe an additional day 3 pick for moving back. But one of our listeners called into the show, and you can call into the show by calling 412-223-6644. And you leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. We'll be happy to get your question on the show. Jeffrey McNeil out of Cincinnati had a question about what if they don't have to move back? Here's Jeffrey's question.
Yo, Chris. It's Jeffrey McNeil from Cincinnati, Ohio. I had a question. So my question is for you. I think the Steelers pick 17 is the perfect number because no matter how the board falls, they can walk away with a good D lineman, edge, corner, maybe an O lineman, Brian Branch at the safety position, maybe even Addison if the board falls a certain way. Is there really a miss at pick 17 for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Like, is there any way if they go with any player, any position, it could potentially be a miss? Thank you.
So thank you, Jeffrey, for your question. But Matt, I want to twist this question a little bit to you because there's always can be a miss.
Everybody misses, right?
Everybody misses at some point. No one is immune to it. But I think what Jeffrey's getting at here is what is the likelihood that the right guy falls to the Steelers at 17, and they're like, you know what, this is no problem. This is great value. We're running to the podium. What do you feel like that likelihood is with how this class could play out and the teams that are ahead of the Steelers?
So I think you have to look at it this way. Like, who do we expect to be gone? I think 4 quarterbacks are gone.
I agree.
No matter what. So we just keep the track, take 4 away from 17 and we'll get down to, who's left. I think you're keeping your fingers crossed that Bijan Robinson goes, and I'm going to give him a 50% chance. I mean, he's a spectacular player.
Tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I have to think a wide receiver's gone, although I'm not impressed with the top of this receiver class.
Same.
They're just in demand. I bet at least 1, hopefully 2. I don't think a tight end goes, and I absolutely think the top 3 tackles, Skoronski, Ohio State, and Jones, Johnson and Jones are gone, unfortunately, because I think you probably jump on one of those 3 if they're there. I don't think that's in the equation. I'm certain, off the field aside, Jalen Carter's gone, Will Anderson's gone.
Yeah,
I think that 2 or 3 other edges are gone. Murphy and those guys, and unfortunately, I think the top 3 corners, in my opinion, which in my head are Gonzalez, Porter, and Illinois. I forget his name.
Witherspoon.
Shouldn't have. Witherspoon, yes.
Yes.
I think those 3 are unlikely to be there. So hopefully I'm wrong on one of those, which is very possible. An extra receiver goes, or Bijan goes, or something like that. And all of a sudden you're looking at one of those corners or tackles and you're happy. But Dale and I talk about this a lot on the drive is, well, I like Bryan Bresee a lot, and he really reminds me of Cam Hayward on the field. Dale adores Brian Branch, and I love him too. I mean, he didn't run great, but he's just such a good football player. It's not his game. He's a slot. He's a safety. He's smart. He's Minka. I mean, he's Saban's guy. Like, those 2 to me would be very attractive at 17, assuming the top, quote, biggest need positions aren't there.
Yeah, I feel you on that. And Brian Branch is an attractive player because of how well he played in Alabama's defense. You could fit him not just in the slot, but drop back as a safety. And, he talked about his admiration for Minka, both Alabama guys. Imagine having 2 quarterbacking type of safeties on the field at the same time who could coordinate. And Terrell Austin, we know he loves, he was a secondary coach. We know he loves the relationship that he has with his guys in the secondary. Man, the things that they could cook up now that he's defensive coordinator. They just led the NFL in interceptions. I would be very intrigued to see what they could do with the flexibility he would offer them there. But also with Bresee, like you were talking about, I've been saying for the longest time, the Steelers need to find the next flag carrier for the defensive line, because Cam Hayward has carried that flag for so long. They were hoping Stephon Tuitt would be able to come back and he would carry that flag for some years afterwards. But now, you have Larry Ogunjobi, who you brought in for a year. Maybe you bring him back, maybe you don't. You have DeMarvin Leal, who I think had a good rookie year, and I think that he could develop. But I'm not so sure he's the superstar defensive lineman who carries the next generation of Steelers defensive linemen to be one of the best fronts in the NFL. I think Bresee could be a guy like that. Like you said, he reminds me of Cam Hayward a little bit. I think there's a chance that they find a guy. I like Keanu Benton in the later rounds, not with 17. But I'm right with you. I think that one of those guys could fall there, and it's also tough because I know some people really like Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle out of Tennessee. I'm still not sold on him at 17 just yet.
Yeah, me either.
I have a hard time. I know Daniel Jeremiah put him there, but I just think that I think Jeffrey has a really good point that there is a lot of ways this can play out where a guy that you're perfectly fine with at 17 is there and you don't have to trade back. But that being considered, as much as the Steelers might value that player, I think it's also a good chance that someone calls you and gives you an extra 2nd round pick, an extra 3rd round pick for moving back. As long as you keep that 1st round pick, I think that should be on the Steelers' radar.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I'm glad you brought up Wright from Tennessee because he's very impressive. I was impressed with his drills. I like everything about the guy. He shut down Will Anderson. But 2 years ago at Tennessee, he was kind of a fish out of water at left tackle, and he's very, very comfortable at right tackle. And if he's a right tackle only, I just don't think that fits the Steelers' needs. I mean, if If they sat down with him, which I'm sure they will, and he's very comfortable on either side and gladly will, give it a shot in camp at left tackle, I'm thinking about it, but more so at like 22, not 17.
Yeah, and that would be interesting because if they were able to trade back, and I took a call yesterday on our show about the options of trading back and what it could net you, that would be an interesting spot there, and then it would also open up the door for maybe the tight end conversation as well. But that is going to be an interesting spot there to see how the Steelers do. I'm really intrigued to see how Omar Khan handles a draft day. We were seeing him handle the draft process and the scouting and everything, and we'll see how it plays out. But when we saw him be aggressive with the trade to send away Chase Claypool, I think we both agree that 32 was amazing value for him.
Sure.
So I'll be very intrigued to see how he moves forward. But the big news in the AFC North right now is a move that the Baltimore Ravens made this week on Tuesday, and that was applying the non-exclusive franchise tag to Lamar Jackson. And I want to go into what that means, if teams will be into bidding wars, and what that could mean for the Ravens moving forward and the Steelers' rivalry with them in the AFC North. We'll talk about all that in just a minute here, right on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined again by Matt Williamson. Matt, I want to ask you about Lamar Jackson and what your thoughts are on just the Ravens applying this franchise tag on him, what you thought about these negotiations. I know that Lamar doesn't have an agent. It's, him and his mom, and they work out the negotiations and everything. Is this the right move for the Ravens? Should they be breaking the bank and say, hey, we want to keep Lamar no matter what? Or is this something that can work in their favor in the long run, considering now teams can now put in a bid to maybe take away Lamar Jackson, and if someone did, they'd get 2 first-round picks?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, this happened very recently. I haven't given it tons and tons of thought, but I found it odd that all the reports, Rap Sheet, Schefter, all these guys, as soon as it happened, are coming out saying, oh, the Falcons aren't interested. The Panthers aren't interested. Washington's not interested. And I'm sitting there going, why on earth not? 2 first-round picks for Lamar, and you get to work on his contract? That's a gift. Jump all over it. And I think I don't know where that came from. They know more than I do, Schefter and those guys. But I bet a lot of teams are interested. And it's such a weird situation because what I know for a fact is when the Brownies signed Deshaun Watson, 31 other owners were livid because they saw this coming, if I'm Lamar, I'm going to Baltimore, and he has every right to, saying, I want Deshaun's contract. I have a better resume than him. I have an MVP. I don't have off the field stuff, let's start there. And I don't think any team would have given Watson that contract except for the Browns. And I don't think any team would give Lamar the Watson contract. So you're at an impasse, and it doesn't help that you don't have an agent. It doesn't help that his style of play would worry me a little bit in terms of, do I want to sign him to a 5-year deal? I mean, what if he loses a little bit of athleticism? I think he's a vastly underrated passer and playmaker besides his wheels, but you want him to be able to run like as he is now, to pay him that way. And the last couple of years, he hasn't held up, so what's that worth? I also think the Ravens schematically have held him back. Everyone thinks they tailored this offense for Lamar. I think it's hurt him more than it's helped him. I mean, let him be a passer. Let him be a passer. Give him wide receivers to catch the football. I mean, they don't throw the wide receivers. How do you expect to win the league without throwing to wide receivers? I mean, it's nuts to me. So I think they've held him back to some degree. At this price, though, how can the Falcons and Panthers and other teams not at least make him a contract offer, which might be exactly what the Ravens want? Is they said, my hunch is they said, we tried all we could and we can't come to a deal because of the Watson stuff. Let some other team negotiate it and we'll match it, or we won't. But 2 first-round picks isn't enough for Lamar.
I agree. I mean, you'd think that if this was a straight up trade, you'd be talking 3 firsts, a couple seconds. Like this would be crazy. This would be crazy for them. And for me, I think we're on the same wavelength about Lamar. I know there's a lot of Pittsburghers like, he's a running back. No, he's not. He's a very good quarterback. He's an MVP in the league.
Great player.
he saved John Harbaugh's job in 2018. If he doesn't come in at the end of that season, I mean, it was very public that that was going to be a mutual parting of ways for that coach and that organization. And then he has held up the Ravens over the past several years. When they've been good, it's been because he's made them good. And yes, they've had really good players like Marlon Humphrey, Calais Campbell. I'm not saying that there aren't contributors, but he makes that engine go. And for him to not get paid is very intriguing to me. And it's funny because, you know, we used to talk about the Steelers and the Ravens being the 1A, 1B of the AFC North, and now the past 2 years, it's been the Cincinnati Bengals. But the Ravens have been the team that I felt like if could have been healthy in either of the last 2 years, they could have won the division, because I think that they have talent on their roster right now. And it's just, if Lamar goes, what does that do to the rest of the AFC North? You have the Steelers rebuilding with a young quarterback who just missed the playoffs. The Bengals, who, you know, haven't been able to basically get their Super Bowl win with Joe Burrow while he's on a rookie deal. You have Deshaun Watson with the Browns. What does that do if Lamar Jackson's not in the AFC North?
I think it's massive. I mean, I have a lot of concerns about the Browns, and the NFL hit them hard because from this point, last year was their window. You know, I mean, from this point on, the way Watson's contract is constructed, the Browns are going to lose more than they gain each year, where they've been buyers before. So it's going to be, and they don't have a first round pick, and, you know, they don't have the resources. So Watson has to be a stud for them to be a contender. He's capable, but he hasn't been in a Browns uniform at all. The Bengals are the class of division right now. There's no doubt.
Of course.
But they've never dealt with having one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league and picking 28th every year like the Steelers and Ravens have. That's not easy. You know, I mean, as great as Burrow is, and I adore him, the Steeler fans are going to hate him for 10 years. He's an assassin. But it's not easy. How do they rebuild the O-line? You know, within your pick, you're not picking between Jamar Chase and Penn Sewell anymore. You're picking 28th and 29th. It's a heck of a lot different with no cap space. But I do think they'll maintain for a while because I have ultimate faith in Burrow, Chase, Higgins. I don't know what to think of the Ravens. I mean, great respect for the organization. I wonder deep down, does Harbaugh look at the offense? And I like the Todd Monken hire at offensive coordinator and say, this style ran its course. We need to throw the ball to receivers. We need to become more traditional with or without Lamar. But if Lamar leaves, one of the more interesting to me is not where Lamar goes or what the contract is. What's the Ravens' next move? Is it go trade up for Richardson and play exactly like you have? Is it go sign a Derek Carr-like pocket passer that couldn't be any more different? You know what I mean? Like, I wonder how the Ravens want to play on offense, and I don't think any of us know that answer.
I agree. I don't know that answer.
Right.
You know, what direction they want to go in. And I just think that if Lamar Jackson were to leave, there is a billion different directions that organization could go. And we've already seen the drama with the Eric DeCosta making the comments, and then Rashad Perriman and everything. All the things are Bateman, excuse me. Rashad Bateman was the one coming out, and even former players were coming in like Hollywood Brown. I just think that could make everything tumultuous. My last question for you, Matt.
Real quick, I 100% agree with you, though. This can't be good for the locker room. It just isn't.
Exactly. Again, Lamar's beloved. Like when he was hurt and the stories were circulating, he could maybe play. And the team is like, no. The players
can hardly walk.
He's barely moving around the facility. Who is saying these things?
Yeah.
And so I'm right with you. This all is not a good look for the Ravens right now. They could pull out of it because they do have a lot of talented guys on that team, but this could go south. And if it does, it could mean they fall into a crazy rebuild phase that would have been unthinkable a year or two ago.
Yep, possible. It's definitely possible.
But my last thing to you is we talked about Burrow. We talked about Watson. We talked about Jackson. What is your trajectory for Kenny Pickett with the Pittsburgh Steelers over the next year? I know it's a big question to finish the show on, but like, what is reasonable? What is a reasonable expectation for him to be able to compete with other top quarterbacks in the NFL and with the Steelers roster as it's composed?
Well, he has to get better, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, in the middle of the field, the 10 to 20 range, the red zone. I mean, his TD to interception numbers are really, really bad, but they don't worry me at all. They don't worry me at all. I mean, he's gonna throw touchdowns. I mean, I don't think he puts the ball in harm's way more than any other young quarterback. I think he's quite good at it. Chris, to be honest with you, I think if he is the 13th, 14th, 15th best quarterback 365 days from now when we talk, we would all take it, and I think that's very feasible. And the arrow's going up, and maybe he's 10 the year after that, and he's not eating up tons of cap space, and you're adding tight ends around him to come full circle. So I'm very optimistic. I don't know that he'll ever be a top 5 guy. Few are, of course,
right?
But I think he's very much going the right path.
Absolutely. We'll see how that path goes. Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Appreciate your insights as always. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, I'm at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Check out Brian and I's podcast. It's Peacock and Williamson, and Ryan McDowell and I do Locked On Dynasty, but I'm all over the place. I'm easy to find.
He is all over the place, and he's easy to find because he's the man. Matt, thanks so much. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. And also, that's why I'm not at home right now. You can notice it's a different background and everything. I'm in my hotel in Greensboro. I'm covering the ACC tournament. So if you're interested in Pitt Hoops, get all the coverage there at post-gazette.com, where me and Noah Hiles are giving live coverage of everything going on down there. But if you're a Locked On Steelers fan, you can find this show on any podcasting platform, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Steelers content. Back Thursday with more Locked On Steelers. We got Alan Saunders back on the show. We'll see you then.